welcome to episode number 25 of the LSR Podcast. My name is Matt Brown, joined each and every week by the brightest minds in all of the gaming industry. With me this week, Eric Ramsey and Adam Candee. That is two E's, no Y. Guys, we are on all of the places where you find podcasts: Google, Stitcher, Apple, all of those, Spotify. So please go in, subscribe, rate, and review. Really, really appreciate it. Really does help us climb the charts. More people will find this very podcast here. Not a ton of stuff going on this week, so this will probably be a fairly quick pod, but next week will not. It will be the MegaPod live from G2E, and we'll talk about G2E here in just a little bit. But let's kick things off here, Eric, with Ohio.
Man, we've been starting in the Midwest, it seems like, a lot lately. We will do that again here. We teased this a little bit last week. Ohio, just fresh off a couple of days of hearings on sports betting. This was in the House Finance Committee. This is a bill sponsored by Dave Greenspan that would put sports betting under the auspices of the lottery. The big takeaway from these hearings, the tone kind of changed between Tuesday and Wednesday. Greenspan seemed to come to an understanding about the perils of mandating official league data on Wednesday, sort of spoke out against the pitch from the PGA Tour, kind of noted that sports leagues and operators have already entered into a lot of agreements for this data. There may not be a need to mandate it. And another representative pushed back on the official league data over the monopoly. So maybe these lawmakers in Illinois have their stuff together. It looks like this bill should get through the House maybe this month. The real work will come in the Senate. It's a little bit of a coin flip there to determine what this bill might look like when it comes out, or if it will come out of the Senate. But we are at least on a favorable path in Ohio through the early stages of fiddling with this bill.
Adam, do we feel there is any sense of urgency going on there in Ohio, with all things considered, that we, on one side you've got Pennsylvania, which is legal. On the other side, you have Indiana, which is legal. So there are a lot of people likely crossing over the border here, and money is funneling out of the state of Ohio.
I agree with that. I think ultimately Ohio has been moving at its own pace all along. We heard rumblings of what was going to come in Ohio at the very beginning of the year. And so they've kind of moved slowly here. It doesn't appear that the pace is picking up any too precipitously at this point. And realistically, nothing Ohio does is going to affect what's happening with Pennsylvania and with Indiana in terms of this year, anything in 2019, especially with football season already being in full swing at this point. So, yeah, I mean, I hear you. They definitely are in a position to be leaking to other states, but certainly seems like Ohio has its own timeline.
Eric, are you impressed at my geography skills right there, that I knew Pennsylvania was on one side of Ohio and that Indiana was on the other side?
No wonder. I was wondering what you were doing this morning. You were studying the map of states again. I understand now.
Hey, listen, the magic of Google, I really was. I pulled open the rundown, I go through, and I see where this thing is located in this.
And you find these states on a map again?
In the middle of we figure out, kind of how things are going. I mean, I guess I didn't really realize that Cincinnati is as close to the border of Indiana as it actually is. There probably has been at least a little bit of bleed over from people in Cincinnati. It's pretty damn close to the border there of Indiana. So I learned something today as well. And Youngstown, Ohio, is very close to the border there in Pennsylvania. So this is my little lesson to you.
You learned several things today. Look at you.
This is fascinating podcasting.
Yeah, well, I mean, there are a lot of people who might not know just how close these are to states that have legal sports betting. So certainly something we will keep an eye on as well. But one of our favorite things to do on this very podcast is talk numbers. We are getting used to it. Was only Nevada and New Jersey. When those come through, we were jumping up and down to be able to report those to you. But Adam, we have new numbers from a new state, which is going to add to the laundry list of states where we can actually start reporting numbers here.
We have numbers in from the great state of Chicago. I'm sorry, from the great state of Indiana, but most of these numbers are from Chicago. September 2019 Indiana report has 35 million in handle and about 8.5 million in revenue, leading to tax collections over $800,000. They do caution that they're not separating out futures, so there is some effect from that in the numbers. But ultimately, these numbers are pretty strong for month one in a state that is not particularly populous. If you look at where the numbers are, though, you can see that a little more than $14 million of that 35 in handle come from the two casinos that are the closest to Chicago. You're looking at there being 15 miles away, roughly a 20 to 30 minute drive. And we know that at the beginning of football season, when they came up, these were sports books that were taking huge numbers on the Chicago Bears. So Chicago is going to Indiana because Illinois, although it has a law, is not even close to being active right now.
Eric, that is your cue into stepping in for people who are not up to date on Illinois. What is going on in Illinois since it was just brought up here?
Illinois, remember, they passed this full-scale gambling expansion right at the tail end of their last session. The big-ticket item is a Chicago area casino. That's going to occupy most of the focus of the regulatory effort, and unfortunately that is a big lift. They're still trying to identify a site for that and studying the feasibility of it. So until we start to make some headway on that project, I think regulators are a little bit distracted. They're, no immediate timeline, no, I can't tell you when we'll have Illinois sports betting. It'll probably be at least 6 months, I would say.
Adam, as far as this football season goes, before we move out of the kind of state news here, as far as this football season goes, I think we are looking at Tennessee by the Super Bowl is at least what they are aiming for. Outside of that, are we looking at anything that has a realistic chance of getting going here?
Not within that time frame. I mean, Tennessee is the closest you're going to see. New Hampshire is in the process, but New Hampshire has been very clear about the fact that this is likely to be closer to next summer than it is to anything in 2019. And with Tennessee, there are potential roadblocks with Tennessee with that official data mandate that's down there. Don't expect that that's going to be a straight line process. There could still be some legal challenges in the works. So Tennessee is the closest, and that's the only one that I would say is a definite to have a shot at this year.
I will move to Tennessee if they happen to get legal sports betting before the Super Bowl. I don't think that is a very real possibility. That continues to be the rumor. I'm very pessimistic about that outlook. And yeah, really no other states on the radar between now and then.
And Eric, we can't go 3 podcasts without mentioning New York. So let's at least I did see come through the Twitter machine earlier this week. They put out the legislative calendar for 2020, and apparently they are meeting earlier in 2020 than they ever have, or something. Or there's more meetings early in the part of the year, or something like that. Is it at least expected that mobile will at least be brought up kind of in these early sessions in New York?
I don't really see how it can be. They're studying the statewide implementation. The deadline for that study is June 1st, and they're going to adjourn on June 2nd. So if they want to bring it up, it looks like they'll have about a day to cobble something together. It just doesn't look like it's in the cards this year.
Boy.
Yeah, exactly.
Feeling rough for those people over there in New York, that is.
And now, fortunately, at least folks in the southern tier and in the western part of the state have other options in neighboring states, not Ohio yet, but Pennsylvania online now to the south. So, it's a little easier for folks in New York to get across a border to place an online bet. But the state of New York itself really missing the boat on this one.
Really wetting the bed, as they say.
Yes, that.
Yes, wetting the bed. Adam, we had an interesting story that was posted at legalsportsreport.com. And, of course, you can go over there and read the entire article should you want to. But there was a NCAA basketball fixing arrest that was made over in New York. Do you want to give everybody kind of the gist of what went on there?
I will warn you that if you are a registered member of sports betting Twitter, you're going to want to skip this segment. So just go ahead and give yourself a 5-minute break right about now. This came out of the Eastern District of New York in District Court. Apparently there was, in December of 2018, a low-level mafia member was caught on a wiretap discussing trying to fix a Division I NCAA basketball game. We don't have more information than that. We don't know what the school was. We don't know where the bet might have been placed. But we do know that a gentleman by the name of Benjamin Bifalco was brought in on this charge. So we'll keep an eye on it. We have a story breaking down what happened per the release from the Eastern District of New York. We also have a good article from our legal expert, John Holden, kind of looking at what this could mean moving forward. So it's a very interesting story, but it's also one that we don't have a lot of details on right now.
So let's since you bring up sports betting Twitter, let's go ahead and say, like, as this story was posted and as things went out, what were some of the varying reactions that you were seeing and what was going on here? Because I know that it was getting a decent amount of traction within at least the bubble.
Within the bubble, there was a lot of discussion that this story was being overblown, that saying that this could be leading to something more sinister, that saying that a match-fixing scandal was only a matter of time was something that was actually going to make it worse, right? That's not realistic. It's going to make it worse for the athletes, etc. You're welcome to the opinion that we're making more of it than there is, but the truth of the matter is, if you look internationally, there's plenty of evidence of these sorts of things going on. Look at the American history. There are evidence of these things going on in American history. To say that we're blowing up this story over just reporting on it and saying, hey, but there's potential for things to get worse is an overreaction in and of itself.
Yeah, there's no there. I want to tack onto that. You know, we're advocates for regulated sports betting, and there is no better reason to regulate sports betting than to protect athletes. The revenue's great.
I mean, we didn't even talk about this beforehand, and this was you knew where I was going with this. That was going to be my follow-up to you was, isn't this just further evidence of why keeping this above board and putting everything out in the open and having transparency out there, isn't this basically just a giant advertisement for that?
There's very little chance this was happening at a regulated sports book, certainly not at a well-regulated sports book. We have some clues to that, maybe with the Wire Act violations being part of this. And this is the time for us to prove what we've been talking about for the last 2 years, that regulation is a way to stem this sort of behavior. You shine a light on it, you take it out from the dark, you expose it to the elements and to regulation and to legalization, and you expect to see, some of this behavior curtailed. It was a little disconcerting to see people saying this is overblown or that it's some sort of scare tactic that might affect the future of regulation. This is why we regulate sports betting, to try to identify things like this.
Adam, one of the things that I saw is people come out and say, well, this is why, you shouldn't be betting on amateur sports and yada, yada, yada. Well, again, to kind of pile on to what Eric is saying here, that would actually create a negative effect, because if you do not allow it here legally in the United States, I can guarantee you that the offshore books and your local bookie is going to allow it. He is not going to not take college sports bets. So essentially all you're doing at that point, you're not curtailing any possible fixing scandals or whatever, because those would still happen, because these bets are not taking place at legal sports books anyway. They're taking place with bookies, or they're taking place at offshore books or whatever it might be. And they are going to continue to offer college sports come hell or high water. So it does not matter whether they are legal in these new markets or not.
We know that college athletics is going to be the battleground, right? This is the one that's going to get people excited. This is the one where we're going to see the strangest regulations. This is the one we're going to see the most discussion because of the talk of unpaid student athletes and the vulnerability that they have. It makes sense. I understand that. But a regulated market is by far the best way to keep this in the light and to make sure that everyone is on the same page as to what the regulations are and what is being done to make sure that these games are kept on the up and up. And you know what? That doesn't mean that something new is happening. These are the same things that have been happening for a long time with the state of Nevada, just brought onto a larger scale here with the fall of PASPA and the spread of, state regulated sports betting across the country.
And Eric, the other thing that we can bring up here is, outside of really basketball, right, where one player can have such an incredible impact on a game, this is almost non-existent outside of that anyway. Like, how many people would you have to bribe on a football team in order to actually throw a game? And then once you start talking, you know how things work. You tell one person who tells one person who tells one person, it would never actually make it to fruition because they would get caught out. They would get caught. And same thing with baseball, which, by the way, isn't widely spread anyway, collegiate baseball. And so it really would take one kind of star player on what I would assume would need to be almost a second tier kind of collegiate basketball team for anything like this to ever come to fruition. So whenever we're talking about these things, you can always paint the doom and gloom, right? You can always take the very worst case scenario and try to throw that out there, but there's a worst case scenario in basically everything when it comes to business. It's not just betting, anything. You can always pull out a worst case scenario here. So, I think people need to take a step back and realize, one, not only is a lot of these little weird things going to, we've caught people in Nevada before doing this stuff. Like, we've caught weird things in low-level tennis. We've caught all kinds of stuff because there's these weird patterns that happen. They get flagged and they look into it, and they've caught these people for these things. And so it can only get better if we continue to monitor these things and go above board with it. But seriously, I think that before people go all crazy with, this is why you can't do this, the amount of coordination it would take, and for this to actually get pulled off in today's day and age with as much technology and as much ways of communication, ways for people to get caught doing bad things, I'm not going to say it's impossible, because it's not, but it is just way, way, way more difficult than it was even, 15, 20 years ago.
Especially in these regulated markets, obviously in the U.S., you're just not going to get something like this through a lot of regulators, the good regulators in the U.S. And I think, maybe I don't have a great concern about match fixing in general. That being said, certainly collegiate sports, the lower level sports you talked about, tennis and some of the sports where guys aren't making hundreds of thousands of dollars or millions of dollars, certainly there's some concern there. That's why we talk about things like, the ban on college betting being bad and on in-play betting, because these bets are available through offshore sports books where we don't have insight into who's betting and how much they're betting and when. So, and the more of this activity we can bring into the regulated environment, the better grasp we're going to have on the integrity of sports. Absolutely.
If you want to read that whole story again, over at legalsportsreport.com. So head over there and you can read this thing top to bottom here. As we mentioned, going to be a short pod this week. Not a ton of stuff went on, but I can guarantee you we are going to be able to come with a massive amount of information over the next few weeks, because here in Las Vegas is G2E, the Global Gaming Expo that starts on Monday, ends on Thursday. We will actually be live from the G2E floor doing this very podcast. So if you are somebody that is important in the industry and you want to talk about everything that is going on with you and or your company and or your state, whatever it might be sure and hit up Dustin Gouker on the Twitter machine. His DMs are open, so he will help you get scheduled on stuff here. But Eric, we were talking a little bit before this, and however you want to kind of go about navigating this, and we saw there's some pretty interesting things that are going on here. First and foremost is going to be a panel that Gary Bettman is a part of.
Yeah, I don't know how much I really want to hear Gary Bettman talk about the emerging industry of sports betting, other than just for sheer amusement. The NHL commissioner, who's sort of been a bump on the log for sports betting for a long time, finally now coming around to embracing it. But yeah, he's doing one of the, I guess it's not a keynote, but it is a what is it called? A panel. Yeah, a panel. Mm-hmm. And it has it's going to have Joe Asher and Matt King from FanDuel and William Hill, as well as the CEO of Rush Street Gaming, Greg Carlin. That should be amusing, if nothing else. I'm not sure how insightful the commissioner will be, but should be entertaining. We also have the keynote itself is from Chris Christie again, who, I always like hearing him talk about the sports leagues in particular. So that's one of the thing that jumped off the page for me on Tuesday is that Christie keynote.
Adam, as we head into G2E this year, of course, last year it happened kind of right as everything was getting going. So we didn't have we know that the energy was very high on sports betting, but again, there wasn't a ton of data behind it. It was still relatively new. Now that we move into, a full year, calendar year of having to be able to track stuff and do different things, are you kind of interested to see how maybe some of that has shifted the thoughts on sports betting as we go? Because one of the things I think that I'm most interested in about heading back over there this year is to see if the buzz is the same, to see if people are still as excited about it as they were when it was, the new fresh toy, and kind of how people's, maybe even perspectives have changed over the course of the last 12 months.
What I'm really interested in, Matt, is how the European operators approached this show. Last year, what I noticed is that a lot of the products that we were seeing from the Europeans were still products that looked a lot like what they had on their side of the pond, and they really hadn't been Americanized yet. And I think we're only starting to see the technology come around to reflect what the American consumer is looking for. I mean, we've had a lot of joking discussion about one of the apps in New Jersey using commas instead of decimals. You know, it's kind of a strange thing, but it's something that is very noticeable when you're looking from the American side. So that's something I'm really interested to see. You know, beyond that, I'm curious what the discussion is like in terms of people's view on expansion, because we're already at 13 legal states after less than 2 years. You know, we've seen forecasts that talk about above 30 states in 5 years. It certainly feels possible with all the legislative action that we've seen. So that's something I'm keeping an eye on as well. To add one thing to Eric's point about Gary Bettman, the only thing I found intriguing about the way they're pitching the session is that they talk about, quote, lessons learned, as though Gary Bettman is going to give us some thought as to how he came around. And I'll be really curious to hear anything other than, well, it wasn't legal, and then it was, and then we had a chance to make money. So.
Right. Also on that panel with him is Joe Asher of William Hill US, and we should point that out because they're very distinct whenever they kind of talk about William Hill US and William Hill overseas over there. And then Matt King of FanDuel was also going to be on that panel with him. Eric, one of the other things we saw that I think all of us will probably be sitting in on is a symposium, a panel, whatever it might be, on sports betting partnerships where the NBA, DraftKings, MGM, and ESPN are all going to be involved in that one.
Yeah, this is maybe the one I'm most looking forward to. I believe this is right near the end on Thursday late morning. It is moderated by a member of the AGA, the American Gaming Association. And yeah, like you said, has folks from DraftKings, NBA, MGM, and ESPN. These are all folks we've talked to. Scott Kaufman-Ross from the NBA is the guy who most often tries to feed us the league's point of view on a personal basis and on a professional basis. So we know him to some extent, and obviously have worked with the folks at DraftKings and MGM as well. That should really be an interesting way to wrap up the session on Thursday. Yeah,
whenever you look at how this thing is described, and if it actually hits on all of these topics and actually gets in depth in all of these topics, this is certainly going to be the highlight for me as well, because it says the topics will include fan engagement, role of technology in expanding engagement, and competing with and disrupting the illegal online market, advertising safeguards, broadcast point of view on sports betting expansion, and responsible messaging. So, Adam, this is certainly obviously the one that jumps off the page to me here is role of technology in expanding engagement and competing with / disrupting the illegal online market. So I am very interested to hear these people who have very important positions within this industry, what their thoughts on as to how they might go about disrupting the offshore industry.
It's a question of direct versus indirect, right? Because you can try to offer a better product indirectly and say, we want people to come to our better product. But we also know that the customer who is offshore is generally the customer who is going to be harder to acquire in the legal market. And acquiring the illegal market is going to require some amount of regulation and enforcement from the government side. We've seen New Jersey taking some steps in that direction over the last few months. So, indirectly, I think we are already seeing it. I'm very curious to see if there will be any sort of private push toward the regulators to say, hey, we need help for us all to work together, for the operators to make money and for the legal markets to make more tax revenue.
And from a broadcast point of view, obviously ESPN already has the Daily Wager on, which is a show that they are running now for an hour every single day on ESPN2 that is dedicated to sports betting, 100%. I mean, hell, it's called The Daily Wager. They have several podcasts that are now within the family there that are dedicated to sports betting as well. So interesting to hear what they have to say on how that might go and continue, with their broadcasting, and maybe they, tip their hand on, are we going to start seeing odds a little more prominently featured on, let's say, Monday Night Football next year, or, SEC football, because they have the big SEC games and stuff. So certainly interested to hear that as well from these guys, but looking forward to getting to hang with you guys as well, and anyone else that wants to come and chat with us. We will be set up and posted up for a few hours over there on the gaming floor, and looking forward to meeting and talking to a whole bunch of people within this industry. As we said, going to wrap this one up pretty quickly this week. Our MegaPod will come out at some point next week after we are able to chop everything up and get it all spliced together, and should be the best one we have yet ever done. For Adam, for Eric, I'm Matt. Talk to you guys next week.